Let the record show that all commissioners are present. Commissioner Michael McHugh, Commissioner Stacy Hawkins, Commissioner Michael Gary, Commissioner Hal Greenwood, and myself, Tim Kennedy. Also present is Jeff Miller, our consultant working on the project, Mike Roth, City Administrator, Patrick Knight, Communications Director. We have an agenda. We have a motion to accept the agenda.
I will so move.
Motion has been made to accept the agenda as presented. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? Okay, and I don't have to recall from the last meeting, or maybe we didn't even do it at the last meeting, that we have to do a roll call vote to acknowledge everybody's participation in the vote. So a simple aye by all doesn't work. So I'll go down the line again. Commissioner McHugh.
Aye.
Commissioner Linskog Hawkins. Take your mute off. Your lips are moving, but
Aye.
yeah, good. Excellent. Commissioner Gary. Take your mute off.
Michael, if you can move your mouse around the screen, and there's an icon that looks like a microphone, you just have to click that. It's on the lower, in the center of the screen.
Okay, aye.
Excellent. Commissioner Greenwood.
Aye.
And I am an aye myself. Motion passes. The agenda is adopted. We also have minutes from the previous meeting. Any corrections, changes, or do we have a motion to approve?
Also move.
Motion has been made by Greenwood. Is there a second?
I will second.
Seconded by McHugh. Same, unless there's any comments. We'll take
Aye.
roll call vote. Commissioner McHugh is an aye. Commissioner Gary.
Aye.
Commissioner Greenwood.
Aye.
Commissioner Hawkins.
Stacy, are you on a computer or a phone? If you're on a phone, you just have to tap the screen, a phone or a tablet, and the icons will show up. If you're on a computer, just move your mouse around, and the icon will show up at the bottom of the screen, right in the center.
Aye.
Excellent. And myself, Tim Kennedy, is an aye. Motion passes. The minutes of the last meeting are approved. With that, we'll go on to our old business, the housing implementation plan, namely the rework of our zoning ordinance regarding housing. Jeff Miller is here to present us with what I'm hoping could be close to the final changes or amendments. Jeff, go ahead.
All right, thank you. Good to see everybody. It's been a wild week or two for everybody, I'm sure. So, yeah, I'm realizing when you said we had an agenda, it's really more of a, here's what the changes are and let's just go through them. So I don't have a, PowerPoint presentation or anything like that. I just have the documents up and I'll walk you through what the changes are versus what the kind of relocations or restructuring things are, which are less significant, but might be confusing for some people when you're looking at just the documents. So we sent out the draft amended zoning ordinance. There's a little bit of work to do on it yet, but most fits in there. And then if it made sense, the clean version is easier to read, but you can't see the changes. So I'll probably use the red line version mostly today, just so I can point to what the changes are. There's a new table. And I think I'll just start to go through what the changes are. So Patrick, do I just say present? Present now?
Yes. Yep.
Let's see. See if that works.
I'm not seeing it yet. It might be best to use, when you do present now, do a window rather than your entire screen, and then just select the window that you want.
Let's see. We try it again. Just a window.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then it'll ask you to select the window that you want to present.
Are you seeing that?
It's getting ready. Yep, we see it.
There it is. Yep.
All right. So, so this is the current ordinance with the red line. So I'm just going to kind of walk through the changes and where we're at as far as what the proposed changes are. And if you have questions, feel free to interrupt me. But or if you have comments or want to talk about a different approach to something, just let me know. So the table of contents, I've just highlighted the sections that are being impacted. So you can see it's, it's some of them, but not, not all that many really. It's really focused on the residential districts and anything that has an impact on the residential districts. So the direction is, as you can see in the table of contents, is deleting the R2 district and consolidating it into just the R1 residential district, which will also mean that the zoning map, I don't know if this works, on the zoning map, I would assume at the same time that those properties that are zoned R2 would become R1 as well.
That's good.
Let's see. So these are just kind of structural things, although Mike Roth has made me aware that you are codifying the ordinance or recodifying it. So I'm not trying to get caught up in the exact number of the section or anything like that. But since R2 is going away, it makes sense to move the other R residential district right next to that one. So what we're showing here is that the RCN resort commercial neighborhood moves into section 19.05. So that's just a move. And then just to fit in with the numbering today, adding a table in there, 19.05A. Before I get to that though, I guess, the changes are going from one R1 and R2 or from two districts, R1, R2 to R1, and then really focusing on adding the housing types to that district. So let's see if I can get down there. Whoops. It's hard to navigate in here. So the difference is structurally is instead of just saying 1 and 2 family dwellings, blah, 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 being clear that 1 family dwellings, 2 family dwelling, and then these new housing types that we've identified. So small apartment dwelling, large apartment dwelling, attached row houses or townhouses, cottage courtyard development. Those are permitted principal uses. And then under conditional principal uses, we've discussed that it's not necessary to list the first one, the rental of rooms. Keeping manufactured or mobile home park developments as a conditional use. Home occupations becomes a conditional accessory use. So you can't have a home occupation unless you have a principal use first on the property. So that moves down there. Apartment buildings, multiple dwelling units, all that is replaced by what's up here by being more specific about housing types. And then the other change to the R1, the RCN is just structurally having principal uses identified clearly, whether they're permitted up here versus conditional. And in general, to get rid of barriers to housing development, the less conditional uses, the better, because that does add to time and cost and unpredictability. So, moving forward, the only things here are manufactured home park developments, not individual manufactured homes, and then planned unit developments, which the city has not been using to date much or at all. So, and then after that, accessory uses, which is where the other new housing type shows up, which is the accessory dwelling unit. Accessory building is something you already had. We're just moving it into that category. Then the next part of the R1 district is lot dimension standards. So in order to do that, we've created a new table. So instead of the table that you have in your ordinance today, which is, let's see,
10,000 square feet. Aren't we going down to 5,000?
yeah, that's what we're going to get into. Let me open up the table. Whoops, the table.
Okay. Excuse me.
Do I have the redlined one? Sorry, let me open up the redlined one.
Jeff, you
Yeah.
may want to try to switch to presenting your entire screen if you have more than one document showing.
Switch to what?
To present your entire screen, because we can't see the table that you're looking at.
Oh. Let's see. Let's see how I do that. Full screen. Oh, then I can't see what I'm doing though.
If you click on present down in the lower right
Yeah.
and stop presenting and then reselect entire screen.
And then do it again.
Yeah.
And do entire screen.
Yeah.
Does that work?
Nope.
As you were figuring this out, Jeff, I do have a question for the group. And one of the questions that I have is in that last section, I think it was subdivision 46, about rear setbacks being 25 feet. Now, there are lots of lots in this town where, the back of the lot would go up against an alley. And I've seen a lot of, there's a lot of different kinds of structures that people have in their backyard. And I'm concerned that 25 feet is too large of a rear setback, especially if you have kind of a lot, some kind of an alley back there. any thoughts from the group?
I think that's a good point, and I think we should lower it to like 10 or 15 feet.
I mean, it might not fit with every kind of lot, but for those that have some kind of a, you can sort of discern some kind of a pre-existing alley. Yeah, it makes more sense that you would try to take advantage of your lot size, especially if you have a smaller one, to be able to, maximize the space in there, if that's kind of our goal.
I totally agree with that.
We do have an exception for accessory structures. So some typical accessory structures include detached garages or garden sheds or other things. Probably a lot of the buildings you're thinking of.
Probably.
If they're under 12 feet in height and they take up less than 30% of the rear or side yard, then they can be as close as 2.5 feet right now.
That's good.
I had one other question about accessory dwelling definition. According to what we're being presented, accessory dwellings by definition now cannot be any larger than the original structure. And I was kind of interested in that. Let's say I buy a small lot, I build a tiny house, but I build a big 2-stall garage, and up and above it I want to put an apartment, an accessory dwelling that's larger than my tiny home. Can I still do that because that accessory dwelling living space is now going to be larger than my tiny home? Is that a concern?
I would like to make a comment now we're on this section. I have heard rumors galore about tearing down the city hall and building a building there and putting condominiums on top of it. And I would recommend that we allow condominiums in the downtown area and Cedar Grove Park. The popular vet doctor has got it. I had to fight to get his apartment on there in Cedar Grove, and look what he's done. He takes calls at night. He's very popular. He serves the community. But if we're going to do that down the line, we're going to have approval of it, and we should do it now.
Well, there are allowances in the ordinance right now that provide for residential uses above the first floor in the downtown district.
But that's limited to the occupant of the building, and I'm talking about getting condominiums above there, not necessarily for the business occupant, but as a source of income. And if you're ever going to do anything with the downtown and the city hall, you're going to have condominiums in there up above there, or it'll never make any sense. And I don't think the ordinance allows that right now, and I would like to see that clarified and allowed. I think it's very important. The mayor has told me that he wants some of the old school ideas taken out. It used to be when I first came up here, the condominiums were a dirty word, and they wouldn't allow any. And we should change that now into permanent condominiums and for sale, and to add to the use of our property.
So Hal, the current ordinance does allow residential above the first floor in the downtown district.
Oh, wait a minute! It's it's for the occupant of the business, and
No,
I want to change that. I want to open.
Hal, that's not. You're not correct.
Okay.
Residential uses above the first floor. There's no reference to being an occupant of the business. So we changed that a number of years ago, and I don't think that there's an issue with that.
Well, that's good, Tim. That's one concern I have, because I know this is going to approach us. And, on the site where the fire is, there's talk about building a building down there and putting condominiums above it, above the restaurant. So we have to get rid of these old-fashioned ideas that people don't want any changes. This is not 1940 anymore. We need to look at business development, and we need to look at helping young people find housing here. And I think what we're doing on this ordinance will do that.
And I think that's what our intent is here, Hal, is to try to make changes to the ordinance that will make home development, residential development, apartment style living, make it easier for either a developer or a homeowner or trying to do a project to do it in a way that isn't so expensive and can open it up to at least more people than are available to it now.
Well, thank you, Tim. I wholeheartedly
I think that's what our intent is.
thank you.
Going back, Michael, to what you were saying about the accessory dwelling, I also had some concerns just about that definition for accessory dwelling unit, the attached one especially, because and I don't know that it's really an issue other than it seems that to me becomes a two-family dwelling almost rather than an accessory dwelling unit. But I don't know how you distinguish between a two-family dwelling and a accessory dwelling unit that's attached.
Well, would it be because of the metering system? I mean, we've talked about if you have an accessory, dwelling space, you are, as the homeowner of the property owner, it's 1 meter, wasn't it? I can't remember. If you have a duplex, isn't that separated with water and sewer and electricity?
And that is wrong. That's an impediment. We lost a townhouse project because of that hookup for each unit. A fourplex all over the state is allowed 1 hookup for the sewer and water, and the association of the fourplex or whatever, they are the ones that have to handle that. We shouldn't get involved in it. But it is an impediment. It is a big cost. In fact, it discourages people from building fourplexes right now. I have proof of it. We lost one. We lost a huge development on the old Howard Joines property because of that. That's a PUC decision, of course, but I think we should recommend that they do that. We always kept the separation between the PUC and the city.
Yeah, and I don't think that the definitions even get into that discussion about separate utilities. That happens with PUC rules and requirements.
We could recommend it because it is affecting development.
Yeah, and I don't think there's any language that's in the zoning ordinance that makes those kind of statements, Hal. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Mike Roth, but I don't remember that there's anything in the zoning ordinance that talks about separate utilities.
But the policy is that they enforce it. And they did on this case I'm talking about. You're on the PUC, Tim. You're the chair.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. Yeah, I think it's a PUC regulation, not a zoning regulation.
But we should recommend that they do it because it involves in the cost of housing. We got to learn to work together.
Hey, Tim.
Yeah.
I had a follow-up question to what Mike was asking about in terms of the setbacks. And I was thinking, so with, let's say it's a garage that's already there, they put in, I don't know, an apartment above it, but it's already on or close. Let's say it's like within, I don't know, 10 feet of the property line. Is that going to be, I mean, to me, that would be an accessory dwelling unit, but it seems like it would be too big to be as small as what Mike was saying before. So it may not be permitted. Is that right? Or is that confusing?
Can I try to weigh in a little bit on this?
Yeah, Mike, go right ahead.
when Mike is asking about, if I build a tiny house and then a garage with a unit that's larger on it, it almost becomes a philosophical question of which one's the permitted principal use and which one's accessory. And I don't know that it really matters. I'm not sure if it matters that we call out that it has to be smaller in the definition either. So that's something that you can think about and consider. When you're asking about putting an accessory dwelling unit into an existing garage, a couple of issues that are separated here. If it's an existing building that you're not changing the footprint of, then it's not something that you would necessarily have to approach the city with a zoning request to do, particularly if it's a use that's allowed. If you're going to be expanding that structure, then that's when we start worrying about, does the existing setback comply with the requirements? Particularly if you're going to put like a second story on it and it's not going to be able to meet that 12-foot height limit anymore, then the part that existed before is all, potentially non-conforming, but legal non-conforming. But any expansion of it's not legal, and you'd have to come in and get a variance to do that.
Are you seeing my screen now?
We see your
Yep.
screen with the table on it, yes.
Oh, you're seeing the table?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So, yeah, so I think where we started was the minimum lot area is going down from 10,000 to 4,000 square feet for one family dwelling. And then you can see across here, the minimum lot width is 40. We're not proposing changing the non-sewered minimums. So, and we're not proposing at this point to change the 30% lot coverage maximum. The two-family dwelling, we're going up a little bit to 5,000 square feet, but not going up in lot width. So that allows, it allows us a narrower lot, the same size of lot width as today, that the one family dwelling has, which is what's in the code today, but going up a little bit in the square footage. And then from there, going up with the small apartment unit dwellings and large apartment dwellings to 10,000 for those. And then the lot widths also go up. And these are mostly what we've talked about. I think the thing that we've wrestled with the most, or I've wrestled with the most with Mike Roth, is this small apartment dwelling housing type, and trying to not make those lots be any bigger than they really need to. And so looked at other cities' requirements for lot area and lot width, and so two families at 5,000 seems like it makes sense that you could go to 3 units and not have to increase the lot size necessarily. It's a minimum, so you definitely could increase it, but making it possible to build 2, 3, 4, up to 6 units on as small of lot as you think you need for that many units, and those sizes can differ on those units. So kind of holding back on not increasing lot area and lot width unless we think it's really necessary. So you see here that I think last time we met, it would have said 6,000 square feet for this small apartment dwelling. Now we're saying 5,000. And I don't want to get into the weeds on the math, but or $1,250 per unit. So that by doing that, other cities do that. You're really favoring retaining small lot sizes for 3, 4, and as you go to 5, 6, it starts to go up a little bit.
I think that's very important. Right now, the smaller houses are selling in Duluth, and they're selling fast. Not only are they cheaper to build, they're cheaper to heat, and it's a trend that's coming around the country in the state of Minnesota. So I think it's a great idea what we've proposed here.
So the biggest changes today, starting with 3 units in your code, your ordinance, you're required to add 2,000 square feet to the lot. So today it's 10,000 for 1 and 2, and then it's 12,000 for 3, 14 for 4, and so forth. So what we're saying, looking at other cities and what they do, you can start to have additional square footage required for additional units at 2, at 3, at 4. What we're showing here, I think, is happening at 5 units. So really through 4 units, not increasing the lot size a lot. So that's making that lot more affordable, hopefully. And then when you get up to the 7 or more units of the larger apartment building, which then, to keep it simple, at that point, you're probably getting a wider building than you would with the small apartment dwelling. So I think that's a good way to think about it, as a narrow, small apartment building versus starting to get wider, because it's 7 or more. So, if it's 20 units or 40 units, obviously it's going to be a bigger and bigger building. The increment of 1,000 is lower than the 1,250 up here, but still it's kind of favoring not increasing the lot size right away, but then moving that way. So today, this is a big change from 2,000 starting at 3 units, and that goes up pretty quickly. Let's see. So no changes to row house, townhouses from what you've seen before. Cottage courtyard development, we raised that to 100, just looking at it a little bit closer rather than 75. And then just adding all other uses. So most of this you've seen. I'd say that the thing we wrestled with was those small and large apartment buildings and how to try to allow those to be built on a little bit smaller lots than you would require elsewhere.
Yeah, and I think you've done a good job with this, Jeff. I think one of the things that we've done, obviously, is had this back and forth conversation about what's the appropriate number for each of those standards. And I don't think we have it's not precise. I mean, it's not whether it's 40 feet or 50 feet or whether it's a 10-foot setback or a 5-foot setback. I mean, it could be any of those numbers. And really, until we go out and solicit the community's response to this, what we think really isn't as relevant as what we get from the community in terms of the response. I mean, if we get told that we're way off base, maybe we are. Maybe the community isn't willing to accept these standards, or maybe they say this is great. We want to go. That would be the case, but until we do that, we could change the numbers every meeting, and we're no closer to getting to the end product. And I think what you've done here, I think, is good work and gets us to the point where we can take it to that next step.
Yeah, and I think you can be confident that we know the 4,000 for the one family dwelling is based in the reality of what you have in Grand Marais today. So that number makes sense. And then, going up from there, we have looked at precedents and other cities' regulations, and these are very much in line with other cities that are trying to do the same thing. The increment varies somewhat, I would say, between 500. Duluth is at 750, and they just apply it, I think, starting with 3 or something. And applied all the way across the board. So, you know, you could get more, it could get smaller. 1250 and 1000 are more, I'd say, in the middle or the typical area. And then there's some that are larger, and there are some up at the 2000. So this seemed to be the reasonable place to start. All right. Wanted to go back to so Patrick, you're saying go back and choose it again? Is that how I changed to a different screen? Are you seeing this ADU screen now or not?
No, it's still on the same table.
Okay, I think I need to stop and choose it again. Window. Let's see if this works.
Hal, you got muted. If you can move your mouse over your screen, you should see an icon where you can turn your microphone back on.
Are you seeing the ADU screen now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so I think the next the question that came up was the ADU. So, I agree with what was said and what Marais said about ADUs. Maybe you don't care about the size of it. I think the reason that, it's pretty much across the board that cities require, they have a maximum like 800. Sometimes it's a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller. 800 is a pretty common number, I'd say, across the board. But the being smaller or equal to the principal dwelling, I think, is the fact that neighbors are, if there's not a limit, well, there is a limit. There's 800 square feet. So I guess you could just say it's 800 square feet. But if that wasn't there, I guess the risk would be somebody has a tiny house as a principal dwelling, in line with other houses up front. And they could have as big a house as they want in back, and that might not be well liked by people who have backyards next to that property, I guess.
I think going back to Mike Gary's question though about what if you bought property that had a small house on it but wanted to put a larger house on it and turn the other into the accessory dwelling. As Mike Ross says, then you just switch the primary or the principal use to the new portion, and the accessory is the portion. Administratively, how that differs at all.
But that does solve that issue unless you still want to stay living in your small house, and everybody would know you're renting the other one. Do we get caught in the weeds with that?
I'm not concerned about it. I think that a residential month-to-month rented property is an allowed principal use in the residential zone. So, and I know of plenty of places where the owner's living in a smaller place than something they're renting, and I'm not sure that it's a concern. So thinking about administering this, I'm not concerned. And then looking at the way it's written, I'm not sure it will trip us up either. I don't think anybody will be able to say, oh, wait a minute, you're living there. That's the principal use.
Okay.
So,
thank you.
Are we considering a change to what I have highlighted here?
I don't know, Mike. Do you think there's a need for a change to the language?
Only if you want to see the ability to have multiple structures that are larger than 800 square feet on a lot and call them accessory dwelling units. I don't think that's necessary because we've got the ability to do other types of multiple structure development with these rules, like cottage house development or row houses, townhouses, that I think gives people a variety of ways to get at multiple larger residential on a single lot. So this works for me.
Yeah, and when I looked at this too, I mean, the first thing I thought is that I couldn't distinguish between an attached accessory dwelling and a two-family dwelling. I'm not sure I could distinguish what the difference is between the two.
Yeah, so an accessory,
Definitions, and I didn't seem to make seemed like they're two-family dwellings and they were attached accessory. Well, it wouldn't necessarily be an accessory dwelling if it's built as a duplex necessarily.
right. Yeah, a duplex could be two owned units, I believe, right? An accessory dwelling unit would not be two owned units.
Right.
An accessory dwelling unit would definitely be on the same utility hookup, I think. I don't know, Mike, would a duplex be in the same utility hookup, or would they usually have two hookups?
It really depends on how and when they were built.
Yeah,
So if they're side by side and starting to look like 2-unit row houses that are intended to be used and sold separately, then we've always encouraged them to have separate utility connections. If
Yeah.
they're in a building that looks like any other single family home and you don't know if there's 2 or 3 units inside, then it's probably just has one utility connection.
All right. So let's see, let's go back to, so we covered the table. Today you have the large table for all those districts, for all the dimensions for lots, buildings, yards, all that stuff's on one single table. So what we're proposing in this amended draft is that there's this table 19.05A, which we were just looking at, is for residential districts. And then the table later on in the ordinance has the residential districts deleted off of that table. The standards are a little bit different, and because we're setting standards at that housing type level, it just works to separate those. So that's really the table's really about lot dimensions, though: lot width, lot area, lot coverage. And then we thought we would do the same thing with building and yard standards or setbacks and that, but those don't vary as much really across the housing types. So right now we're not doing a table, and we're doing it, trying to keep it as simple as possible. So so for R1, this is the building height maximum, and then the setbacks. And what's highlighted is what is changed from your current ordinance. So building height is 35 feet in the R1. Today, we're not recommending a change, except for the cottage courtyard development. Those structures are intended to be smaller houses clustered around a private open space, typically 1 to 1.5 stories. So 18 feet is would be the maximum, and that's the same for the ADU, I believe. The idea is that those are usually smaller structures. Front yard setback, staying at the 25 feet, although I know the commission's had a discussion about, could that be smaller? Should we reduce that? So open to that, but right now we've said, or the average setback of developed lots on the same block base, whichever is less. So if the average of the other 4 houses on the block is 15 feet, then it's 15 instead of 25. Side yard, as you know, we've reduced from 10 to 5, but as a way to deal with the question of should there be some kind of buffer or transition area between some of the bigger housing types that could come in as new buildings, which would be the attached row houses possibly, or large apartment buildings. We are showing that those would have a little bit bigger side backs on the side, so 10 feet instead of 5 feet, rather than requiring, a certain landscaping or fencing or something like that. Is that any questions or comments about that, or the front yard setback maybe being lower? Anything on that stuff?
I have a couple comments. I like, I appreciate and agree with the idea of having a wider side yard setback for a larger structure. I think that makes sense. I think that appeals to most people. And I know that we talked a lot about, we have this irregular town with irregular houses, and some houses are set 10 feet back, some are 25. I think you've done a great job of trying to come up with some language when you're trying to use the average setback. I just want to clarify that. So like if you're on a block and there are 4 houses, 3 are at 10 feet and one's at 25, and there's a place to put one more house, you're going to, the closest that house could be then would be like 13 feet or something. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Another way to do it would be to say, this is a common way that cities allow an average or a smaller setback than the strict one. But the other way would be to say the setback could be as close as the closest house to the street, but that gets a little risky if there's one house that's 5 feet away.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the spirit is to try to create some language that is as simple as possible, and I think your average language does that. But it's just curious if they're, again, house at 10, house at 10, a house at 10, and 1 at 25. You want to build a new house, 3 out of the 4 at 10, and you feel like that. You'd want to be at 10 just because you think it looks harmonious, I don't like the idea of, just following the rules of one rogue home, but I'm not quite sure. I'm curious about what anybody else thinks.
Well, average isn't very precise. Maybe it's not median. Maybe it's something else. Or, maybe it's median rather than mean, I'm saying. So what if or mode is what you're trying to hinting at. If the most common distance is 10, maybe we go with 10. So we could look at differentiating that. I'm still not 100% sure I like this language. It's usable, and that's good. It's understandable for the most part. I think most people would understand this to mean that we're taking the mean of the distances. So that's good. But does it achieve the goal that we're trying to achieve with the front yard setback? And in this case, the regularity of the front yard setbacks, in my mind, is about view preservation more than anything else in this town. And so then it's almost like we should say, you can't be any closer than the next 2 houses to the north or west of you are. Because who cares if the house, below you is 50 feet away? That shouldn't be relevant to the question. But if the house above you is at 25 feet and they're the ones that are set back, and now here you are coming in and you place yours at 18, well, but then it gets really complex and difficult to figure out how to write the language or how to administer it. So in this case, I think if somebody comes in and there's 3 at 10 and 1 at 25 and they really want to be at 10 and they can make a solid case, they can always ask for a variance.
This will be probably, when we do go out to the public, this will be a sticking point. I think you're smart to come back to the idea of view. I don't know. I don't have a suggestion as far how to change the language. So
I want to just interject with kind of a meta process point here. We've been out to the public on this, and with a lot of notices about the process occurring and all of the data available for people to look at. I think that my expectation is that a lot of folks haven't looked at it yet, and there's a lot of other things going on right now, so no surprise. And we're going to spend a lot more effort in the next month trying to get the specific language in front of people, or even just the fact that we want to hear from them, and now is their chance in front of people. But we're going to need your help to do that, everybody. So put your acting hats on, because Patrick's going to put you on the internet and you're going to tell people what's going on here, kind of like we've done with some of our other projects.
Yeah, so often in this kind of a process, people are reluctant to get engaged when we're going on the back and forth of trying to have a conversation and set the standards. So really, when you put the draft together, then they can actually see something, and we'll be able to envision how it might work for them, that they either like it or don't like it, or at least let their opinions be known if they have an opinion. So, I guess we're getting close to that point.
And for those of you who had the great opportunity to actually dig through this red line, and just imagine if you weren't on the Planning Commission, what would have possibly motivated you to do that? And if you can answer that question, I'd really love to hear it, because we will use that to try and inform our process.
Insomnia, can't sleep, totally distressed by other things. Who knows?
Well, the last time we were speaking together, we talked about it's building season, and I'm not in any way suggesting that we want to rush this. We want to do it right, but I do feel like people want to get building. We want to get something to them as soon as we can. It felt like that was an important point that I hadn't considered, except for last meeting, and so.
All right, well, just so we get through it all, you can see just in the red lines, R2 is gone, replaced with and then we've moved RCN into this location. So that's just a relocation of the district, but very similar. So we don't have to talk through all these, but all the housing types, until recently, I think I wasn't clear if RCN was going to be changing or not, but it makes sense. It's the location of where it is in the neighborhood. You would want these housing types to be permitted there. So treating it really similarly. The conditional uses are a different set of things than R1, of course. So, we've tweaked those a little bit, but those don't really have anything to do with housing type. So I'm not going to dwell on that. And then you can see here, these are basically the same standards. So instead of it just being about R1 and R2, RCN is part of the mix of what's going to be amended. And then we did.
Jeff, with the purpose statement of the RCN district, we didn't make any changes to that, but we added a number of uses that we had not mentioned before. Do you think that there's any need to expand on that purpose statement to, just talk about the maybe the small and large scale apartments, or the cottage or row houses, just to kind of create a sense of what this district is, because it seems to me it's changing a little bit from what it was or what it is right now to opening it up to something a little bit more. And maybe there needs to be a very simple statement in there about the need for additional housing types.
Yeah, I can do that. I think that's a good point. Yep. Okay. Then the next districts we don't really touch.
Let's back up and just touch on RCN for a second.
Okay.
And, you know, full disclosure, I live there, so keep that in mind.
Close and personal.
Saying this, but it's clearly just been a zone that was created. You look at the list of uses that exist there now, and it's like, okay, what's on this block right now? And every random crazy idea of what's on the block is on the list of uses, and there is not another zone in the universe that looks like this. It works for us because, you know, it allows the status quo to be maintained and the things that people are generally doing there to do. But if you look at another zone that we have that might be something that's similar to this, but not so specific, it's that mixed use zone in the adjacent to the residential zones that I think probably achieves a lot of the things that we're trying to achieve with this zone, but it doesn't specifically call out laundromats and government buildings and kind of a random but very specific list of things, but rather it does include the types of uses that we're going for, including small scale residential things. So one idea, and maybe this isn't the time for it, but would be rather than try to fix the RCN so that it matches the residential zones, we could try to just get rid of it and adopt an existing zone that fits pretty closely with what RCN is doing, which would be, in my mind anyway, the mixed use zone.
That might make a lot of sense. I mean, I know this was changed to accommodate the types of uses that were in at one time a residential zone district that were clearly not residential at all, and they were non-conforming, yet wanted to change and expand and modify, and it was a challenge to try to do that within the confines of a residential district. I mean, I even look at it now and think that, manufactured home parks are still an allowable use in that district, and thinking, well, I don't know how a manufactured home park could ever get built in that district. Even if somebody wiped out a whole block, it wouldn't make any sense, development-wise, nor planning-wise, or I guess in just a lot of ways. So maybe you're right, Mike. Maybe the long term is we need to be looking at something different for this, and not be calling it the RCN district, but be calling it something else. I don't know that that's going to resolve for where we are today, but
well, that was actually a question I identified today, was should the mixed use district have the new housing types in it anyway, which would be an easy change, easy to redline it. But if we're going to apply it to the RCN area, then it probably would definitely make sense to update it with the new housing types. Anything else on that? Let's see. So the next biggest change you probably saw if you look through the code was adding a section called use specific standards. And it's actually, the intent was to say if there's these new housing types and there's some standards that are needed to allow them to be built in the neighborhood with single family homes and duplexes, the commission agreed that, a mix of housing types in the neighborhood can be a positive thing. So we should go forward with that. But maybe there's some standards that are needed. So in setting that up, which we've done in other cities when we've rewritten their whole zoning ordinances, we were just thinking of that for some of these new housing types. So,
Just a second,
should-
Jeff. I just want to make sure that Hal's he will return his mic on if he wants to.
okay.
Hal, your microphone is off. If you move your mouse, you should see an icon at the bottom of the screen that has a red microphone on it. If you press that, then you can talk. You may want to ask Sue to help you with that.
Should I keep going?
Yeah.
Okay, so the gist of the use specific standards is these are standards for uses versus all the other standards we've talked about have been more focused on just, zoning districts and more dimensional things. So what's in this, there's 12 uses in here. 4 of them are the new housing types. So attached row houses in here, large apartment dwellings in here, cottage courtyards in here, and ADUs. But in doing that and working with the RCN district, which maybe it's going to go away now, but I mean, we still need it for some other uses. So
Hi, is this Sue? Oh, sorry, I'm muted.
So we added some of the uses that had standards in RCN into this section, and they apply to other districts. And then we've added some uses that are deeper in the, or later in the zoning, like hotels, auto service stations. Yeah, hotels and manufactured home parks. So it's kind of a kind of a diverse mix of uses in here, but it includes bed and breakfast homes, which we're not making any changes to it. It's just where it will show up. Mike Roth's favorite, the self-service laundromat, has a standard that we need to keep in there for now, at least. Churches have a lighting standard, same one. There might be a way to deal with that lighting differently. So if anybody has ideas about that might be able to go somewhere else. Manufactured homes, we've moved it into this. But as you can see, we've crossed out a lot of things as we've talked about that one. So it's one of the things I need to finish up is, what do we need to keep by state statute related to manufactured homes? But it will be pretty limited, whatever we keep here.
Is that why the first sentence is just highlighted and there's no changes to it? Is that reference to those state statutes that might be affecting that?
Yeah, we just need to make sure that they're still accurate, and if there's anything else we need to have in there by state statute, but I don't think there'll be much left here.
Okay. So another question is, when you've taken out the sign provisions in those previous ones, I didn't look through the sign ordinance portion of this, the sign regulation portion, were they moved into that or somehow?
Yes.
All right, that was my assumption. I just didn't get to take a look at the sign portion of it.
Yeah, so that's just kind of an organization thing, but yeah, they've been moved into signs. So nothing was deleted per se. And then for the new housing types, as we go through, so attached row house, you know, the standards we have so far, each dwelling. So, you know, just to remind you, attached row houses are physically attached, but they're on their own individually owned lots. And so one of the standards is that they each have to have a principal entrance facing the street, and they have to have access to off-street parking from an alley, which might be a discussion point, but there's, if we don't have that in there, if there's not an alley, they would have to be front loaded. Garages on the street as like
Jeff,
tuck unders are.
It could be a shared driveway that comes from the front rather than alley parking. If there's still parking in the rear.
Yeah.
I'm also looking at this use as the replacement for what folks have been doing with duplexes for the past 15 or 20 years, which is building side by side that they really want to have the ability to sell separately. And with 2 units, for sure, they look like you'd expect a duplex to look, and they often have 2 driveways or 1 shared driveway and 2 garages that go to the front, but they're also on 10,000 square foot lots. So I want folks to be able to use the benefits of being able to split those types of units that we're writing into the ordinance here without messing things up. So I don't know if we're quite there yet on that off-street parking piece.
Yeah. Yes, I agree. Large apartment dwelling, we have, I mean, the challenge there is that they're individual lots. So if there's 4 of them, you know, where's the driveway? Because they're attached. So it's easy to think of an alley of providing access to each lot, but when the buildings are attached, but without that, it gets trickier unless they're, you know, front loaded. Large apartment dwelling, standards about where exterior waste and recycling should be located on the site and that it should be screened with a fence. Surface parking areas shall be screened with landscaping or fencing. We talked about, I think this language actually comes from the downtown design guidelines. Is that right, Mike? Does that look familiar?
Yes.
Sure. Which was suggested. And, you know, so this access issue with row houses, we don't have with an apartment building because, you know, there's space to put a driveway on that property from the front street or the side street, whatever the situation is. Cottage courtyard development, which, by the way this is written, could be houses, you know, stick-built, site-built houses, modular houses, tiny houses, or potentially manufactured mobile homes or manufactured homes. I think you probably, I didn't mention this, but throughout the code, we're using manufactured home park or a manufactured home rather than mobile home because that's a common thing that was updated when HUD changed their regulations for manufactured and mobile homes. So mostly the mobile home term is going away from the code. So for cottage courtyard, the minimum distance between dwellings standard is 10 feet. There's a requirement of a shared courtyard, and how large it needs to be minimum, so 20 by 20. Principal entrances, pedestrian paths, and then shared parking in the rear. One parking space per unit. So I think we've talked about all these things, but I don't know if they've been as clear as what they're shown here today.
And a question with regard to a courtyard type development is whether or not you could have 2 family units as part of that mix, or accessory dwelling units, attached accessory dwelling units as part of that mix. Yeah, I don't necessarily read that that's the case here, but I'm not sure if that's by intent or just not.
Yeah, the intent is that it would not be, it would just be 1 family dwelling units, and that accessory dwelling units wouldn't be allowed, because cottage courtyards could be on a single lot. They may be separate lots, but I think more likely they're not separate lots because they have the shared open space.
Right.
They could be either way. But yeah, the intention, and maybe we need to tighten up the definition, is that each house is a 1 family dwelling, each cottage. The manufactured home park is in this section, and it's a little bit lengthy. I haven't reviewed this to figure out what needs to stay or not, but my sense is, well, our sense is there's not going to be a lot of these probably, but there's still a conditional use. But this will get cleaned up because, for instance, it has things about minimums and maximums, which don't need to be in here because they're in the table now. So a lot of this will go away, dimensional stuff.
And these are the same standards that have been in place since the zoning ordinance was originally adopted back in the early 70s. So nothing has changed with this, nor have we seen any applications for manufactured home parks during that 50-year time period either. So it may not be a big issue, but one that we should at least make sure we're current with state regulations and standards. Beyond that, I'm not sure that there's a lot of need to invest a lot of time into that conversation.
Yeah, and like I said, I think there is right now we're showing this as a housing type, a manufactured home park development, in addition to the cottage courtyard development. And when we first started the conversation, we also had, a tiny house development on there too. But I'll go back to definitions at the beginning of the ordinance in a couple minutes. But in general, I think it's possible that we could make sure cottage courtyard development includes manufactured homes, and you wouldn't theoretically need this, I don't think, in your code. You could just say it's a housing construction type that's allowed in that cottage courtyard housing type.
Just
the other one is tiny houses, which we've talked a lot about tiny houses. What we're showing tonight is tiny houses are allowed by the ordinance. They can be, a 1-family principal dwelling. They can be an accessory dwelling unit. They could be a cottage courtyard development. And when I go back to the definitions, if you didn't notice it, all those housing types that I just mentioned include the fact that a tiny house qualifies as that housing type. And I think also manufactured housing construction and modular are in those definitions as well. So it's really, talking about housing types or forms versus construction types and trying to have that be cleaner in the ordinance.
I think the only difference, the state regulates manufactured home parks, and they have standards and regulations where they don't regulate a cottage home village. At least I don't think those regulations apply to that.
Yeah, and that at this point, that's why we've left it in here, is to make sure it's consistent with state statute. So
yeah.
we didn't want to delete it altogether at this point. So that's that. And then the accessory dwelling unit, I don't know if people had a chance to look through those. We've talked about these before. If there was any other questions about any of these? If not,
800 square feet, if that's a two-story structure, is it 800 square feet of footprint, or is it 800 square feet of total dwelling or building area?
Total square footage.
Okay.
It's also limited in height to 16 feet, so it's going to be tough to get a second story in.
Oh, yeah, okay, I guess I missed that part, 16 feet, that's okay.
Yeah, and if anybody has a strong opinion about, I think the cottage courtyard houses in this should be the same, 16 or 18. The idea is 1.5 stories, not a full 2-story house, which is, a bigger size of house. So
the only thing to think about is there's a lot right now of examples of what I think would qualify as accessory dwelling units that are actually apartments that are a second floor on a detached garage, and they may be taller than 16 feet.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, so would it need to be more like 20, just not something less than 35, but okay, we can check in on that.
I'll look at a few of them.
Look at my permit application, Mike.
The utility question's the utilities are not addressed in here. The only thing that is in here is this standard at the bottom about it should not be sold independently of the residential dwelling. So, the intent is that it's not going to be 2 ownerships down the road.
Yeah, and that's why a question about the 2-family dwelling versus the accessory dwelling. When does it become just a 2-family dwelling and not an accessory if it's attached?
I'm going to go back and talk about what Mike said. I'm thinking about detached garages that I know in this community who have apartments above. And yes, they are taller than 16 feet. And I think it does make sense that you would raise it. I don't know if, do we go 20? My question is, if you're going to raise that height because you're going to need it, is 800 square feet then too small?
Yeah, there's not a magic number, but I'd say the largest I saw was 1,000 or 1,200 maybe, but 800 was what a lot of cities are using.
Maybe the number has to do with the livable space rather than the gross square footage. If it's a garage below and a dwelling unit above, that you only take the livable square footage.
Oh yeah, I think we could clarify that.
That makes sense.
But, I think this goes back to an earlier point that you made, Mike, that you made about it become the primary structure, or the primary use of the property, and the original home could become the accessory dwelling. And maybe you flip the use of the property.
Yeah, we won't be keeping a database that says that structure is an accessory structure anywhere. So it'd be when somebody brings in an application to build, then we'll have to decide if that structure that they're going to build is too big to be considered an accessory dwelling unit. Is the one that's left over on the property small enough to be considered an accessory dwelling unit? And if so, then there's not an issue. So I just did a quick check on one particular structure that I know that's a detached garage with an apartment above, and it's just over 1,000 square feet, and it's 20 feet high at the peak.
Nice round numbers.
I like that. Yep, that makes sense. And it fits with what's already in the community.
Let's see. So these other ones, we don't need to talk about hotels. We just moved them here, so we're not making any changes to them, or the auto service station. It's just locating them here and then deleting them in the general regulations area later in the code. I think that's it. I noticed some questions we've had. So I think there's just 4 of them, but we have this subdivision 2 in general regulations about having more than one principal structure on a lot. And we've talked about maybe that's not needed. If we do the courtyard, cottage courtyard and the ADU, this would apply to not just residential properties. So we could delete it, but it might be kind of confusing with the housing types now, but so that's one of them to consider. There's this other one about yard. So if there is an ADU, you have to meet these yard requirements. So I'm not sure if this one will need to go or not. It's kind of confusing to me, so I can work with Mike on this one, whether it's needs to be there or not. And then so you'll see all the changes. So you'll see the signs are in here for RCN, the sign regulations. Parking, we're showing changing apartments from 1.5 to 1 parking space. We're not adding anything for, oh no, ADU is handled in the other area. Could add ADU here too, I suppose, but that's at 1 space per unit. We talked a lot about that, but felt like we landed on 1 so far rather than something less or 0. This foundation requirement, this would not allow slab on grade or other concrete foundation types, which could help with affordable housing. So this might be too restrictive. And I think there was one more.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that that would be restrictive.
Yeah, actually, that's it.
Yeah, I was just going to suggest that maybe we should take that out unless anybody here knows any reason why we shouldn't.
Well, this is one of the tricky spots where we're using our zoning ordinance to try and be a building code, and we don't do building code enforcement. But if you think about some of the construction types that have even occurred, say, across the street from us, Michael, where somebody cuts a few pieces of logs and that's the foundation of the building that they're building, it makes me wonder if, you know, we just take the word block out of there and it just says treated wood or concrete, then suddenly we're good. And we don't even have to mention, you know, concrete footings, a slab on grade technically is a type of footing, I suppose, if we're not too specific about what we're saying.
Okay.
There might be some use to keeping it in there.
You know, I could tell you that the history of that goes back to that reference to the 17-foot wide width of a manufactured or mobile home. You look at the date of that, this question of the amendment, or this amendment, at the same date as the amendment for the 7-foot width, and really it was a way to prohibit mobile homes from being single-wide mobile homes from being placed on lots in the city. So I mean, I think the intent was far different than what we might think it might mean today.
Yeah, I mean, I think Mike's proposal would probably is a way to go to just remove the word block, because the other ones are basically concrete types.
Yeah. Slab on grade is a type of foundation. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, and there's something called like frost protected shallow foundation. It's not block. It's still a foundation.
And Mike gets back to the fact that we don't enforce a building code. And when you have building regulations in a zoning regulation, we have no ability to really make any calls or determinations on that, because we don't receive building plans and we don't do any type of building inspection.
Yeah.
So I mean, we could remove it entirely, because there just isn't a way for us to administer that unless we take on a whole different program than we have now.
So that's everything that I was gonna explain or describe to you. So the things that I know we have left, there's some, you know, kind of cleanup stuff, which isn't a major amount of work, I don't think. The other thing we were gonna do is illustrate a handful of the new housing types and just, you know, test the standards that we put in there and make sure that we're pretty sure that they work. So, but I think we also will use those illustrations to show the public what, you know, a new housing type would look like in an existing block that has other houses on it. That's probably the major thing we have left to do, other than some of these cleanup things and tweaking things. The one question I have is that rear yard setback that came up at the beginning. Is that something you want to change in this draft to reduce it from 25 to something lower?
Yeah, McHugh, you had a comment about that earlier.
I'm the one who raised the question. I still have some, not concern, but question about it. Especially with lots that, you know, again, abut against sort of an alley, that 25 feet seems unnecessary. And if we're trying to get smaller lots, and it just feels like it would make sense that they have a little more flexibility. Again, I'm not trying to impinge on any neighbors, but I think I don't see why that can't be smaller, but I look to my other commissioners for their ideas.
Now, aren't ADUs allowed to be closer than that, though?
Yeah, they're allowed to be 5 feet away.
So wouldn't that address what you're talking about, Mike?
That does take care, yeah, that does satisfy, I guess, one of my concerns, that you can use that lot to do some other things. And I think Mike Roth said something about garages too. You can move them, farther back.
Yeah, the issue is really one of dwelling units that would have to be located further than the accessory units.
I guess I just am trying to, the theme is we're looking at density, trying to use these lots efficiently, smartly, giving some people some flexibility to be creative. That's sort of the spirit I'm approaching this with.
I guess I may be open to lowering it a little bit, but I am more of keeping that for the main residence, which you tend to think is the bigger building. And yeah, you can have the ADU, and that is closer, a smaller building closer to your neighbor down across the alley, like me. So I guess I don't want to lower that too much.
Yeah, I was thinking about your lot where I used to live next to you, the same thing. It's like there is that space in the back. You look, everybody's got kind of a garage or some kind of building back there. Again, I don't know if this helps with views or not with views, which is of course important to the nature of our town. Anybody else? If we reduced it to 20, does that matter? Do we just keep it the same? I mean, we've talked about having some flexibility in front yards. Why not some flexibility in backyards?
I mean, we certainly have lived with the 25-foot standard for a long time, but we also have parts of town where we know that there's development that exists much older than that 25-foot, especially with cabins and such that are located on alleys that are built very close within a few feet of the property line.
Jeff, can you mute yourself? You got some background noise.
I mean, I think we could go either way, but I mean, I don't have a strong feeling.
I don't know. I'm just thinking about flexibility. Like, what if moving your house farther back in your lot gives you a better view? I don't know. And maybe I'm just wasting everybody's time. I do appreciate, kind of what Hal was saying about it's a new time and a new era. We let go of some of these things that we've lived with for a long time. But then again, I'm not trying to propose anything that would disrupt the harmony of our community.
And Mike McHugh, I'm just wondering how it is not addressed with the ADU. Like, to me, I feel like we're hitting the problem I think that you're driving at. I think we've addressed it in that way. Is there something else? Because I think, like
Mike, I think that's probably right. You're probably right with that. Yeah. I don't know why. I mean, I'm just trying to leave creativity, have a chance, I mean, like maybe I'm going to buy a lot, I'm going to build a house, and maybe I want to push it back farther in my lot and not have a garage and not have an ADU, and just enjoy maybe a little space in my front just because I can. Maybe my lot backs up to a big rock wall, or maybe it, I mean, I'm not sure why it is a sacred number. I do appreciate, you know, the setbacks for those other additional ideas.
So sorry, I got disconnected somehow, but for the RCN, are we considering getting rid of that and replacing that with the MU district?
Well, my thought is how complicated is that at this point, you know, to eliminate that and then just create an MU district for that district. I mean, the MU district allows considerably more uses than the RCN district.
It allows right now, and this is a point that Jeff brought up earlier that I hadn't thought of, but single family residence, multifamily 2 to 4 unit residences, services, excluding auto-oriented services, arts and cultural uses, retail, bed and breakfasts. So if you think about the commercial uses that are existing in that zone right now, I think that they're allowed in the mixed use zone. But even if we don't make this change, we probably have to get into the mixed use zone and amend the housing types that are allowed.
Yeah, so we could make the changes to the MU district. I don't think that would be a lot of work, and whether you change the map now or later, that could happen separately.
Well, Mike, as a resident of the RCN district, you know, how do you see Michael Gary? You're not in the RCN district though. You're yeah. The line divides the duplex or something. I mean, I'm just wondering how you perceive that affecting potentials for things to happen in that district that might be different than what you anticipate that residents or business owners or whatever might see as the intent of that area right now.
Well, that's a good conversation to have with some folks that live in the district that aren't me. But if you just want to hear my opinion, right where I'm at is a pretty diverse group of uses already. Yep. So I'm not particularly concerned about new uses. As a matter of fact, there's a few new uses I wouldn't mind seeing in the neighborhood. And it's maybe more of the blocks that are a little further north where it's almost like above 3rd Street. It seems like it's almost entirely residential uses after that point. And maybe, you know, we can offer the choice to them that they can either be mixed use or residential and see which one fits better with that neighborhood. Except for that laundromat thing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking that doing this, you know, might slow this process down enough that we're not going to get it done quick enough to get onto this construction season.
Yeah, and I think Jeff brought it up.
I'm not sure if that's a realistic goal anyway, but
I mean, we can just make the changes that we need to in the mixed use zone so it's got the right housing. And then we can always revisit this question later.
Can you hear me now? Hal?
Oh, yeah.
we can hear you now, Hal, yes.
Okay, good. I like that idea that Mike Roth just said. He seems to, he's the one that has to deal with all this, so his input is very important to our discussion here today.
Yeah, and then we all have to deal with him, right? So.
Yeah.
But one of the charges we've had here is to try to get more low-income housing. And this cluster thing, there's going to be probably an application coming forth. I don't want to mention where it is, but it's going to be allowed. It's clustered manufactured housing with plenty of, the ordinance that you're proposing fits it perfectly. But it's going to happen. And then Bruce Block probably someday will probably do some trailer park stuff behind his project. So we don't have any much demand for trailer parks in the cities, but that could change over time.
Good. Thanks, Hal. Anybody else may have any comments, thoughts? Are we on the right track? Are we ready to move this thing forward?
I certainly think we are. I think it's very good what's been done. Jeff, you've done a good job. And I think what we're proposing is going to be helpful to the future of this city. As you all know, housing is a big problem and always has been in Grand Marais. When people come up here to get a job, they have a difficulty in obtaining housing. That's got to change. And there's more younger people coming into town, and the views will change. We're not back in 1940 anymore, even though I was there.
Anybody else? No? Well, what do you need at this point, Jeff?
I think you've been really clear. So I just have some follow-up changes to make. I don't think they're substantial. I think the MU district will not be a big deal to make that allow those housing types. And the rest seems more like technical stuff that I can work with Mike Roth on, and we can have a draft that can be, I don't know how you want to share it first, but I don't know that I think the public could look at, but I know we need to talk more about that process in general.
Well, why don't you do that? Prepare that, work with Mike to, get it to the form that you think necessary. And then, Mike, you and Patrick can have to have the conversation about how we disseminate this information and try to gather, community in a way. We've got so many issues going on right now. I'm concerned that we're going to get lost in the shuffle of other priorities. But I think we have an obligation to try to do what we can to engage people however we can and get them involved in this.
So this is one of those real tough issues for us because we have to hold a public hearing, and we'll schedule it for your meeting in July. But your meeting in July, it doesn't seem likely will be a meeting in person. So I've never really liked the public hearing process as a kind of put all your eggs in one basket and hope that people show up and talk to you. That's not a good way to create rules. And it's not really a good way to engage the public in the process. It's the end of the process most of the time. So we'll be spending the next few weeks just repeating some of the efforts that we made earlier, getting in the newspaper, getting on the radio, getting online, and letting people know about this process. Probably trying to use more information like the summary that Jeff prepared in his memo of here are the changes that we're looking at making. It's just some smaller bites for people to maybe grab a hold of and see if they're interested. They can always dig into the whole thing, which will also be available for them. But we'll also be encouraging folks to give us their feedback now and kind of continually, rather than wait until the July meeting to, let everybody talk. We'll still have to figure out how we're going to let everybody talk at the July meeting.
Mike, I think that's a great idea, and I want to compliment the ads that you've already been putting in about what we're doing, because a lot of people have called me and showed an interest, and I think we're doing the right thing, in my opinion. Thanks to you, Jeff.
So the other strategy that we've regularly been using is to try and reach out to people where they gather, and I don't know where that is anymore. So spread the word, yourselves as well, if you're talking to folks, and we'll still be talking to people we know that are thinking about development projects, and to local realtors and other folks that kind of get involved in these issues, and letting them know what's going on, and hopefully then we'll get some comments out.
Okay. Anything else from anybody before we sign off?
I'll make a motion that we adjourn.
Oh, I'll second that. Meeting is adjourned. How's that? We were even on that. I could just make that decision. So here we are. Thanks, everybody. Have a nice evening.
Thanks, guys.
Hard work on that, but it's really come along.
Yeah. You guys are great to work with.
Okay. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.